Hello students, this is going to be a quick tutorial about placing and animating the characters in our Sparky and Muska short film that we're making. So to start off with, I've just got my generic unanimated, unadorned scene file here. It just has all of my set in it basically. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, since I'm probably going to end up animating multiple scenes, not for this tutorial, but within my workflow, I'm going to set up a background scene. So I'm going to, up here, rename my scene to scene_bg, just so I can keep track of it. And then I'm going to create a brand new scene. I'm going to copy my settings so that I don't have to go through all that malarkey again of choosing my render engine and all that sort of thing. But then I'm going to go to my scene data here, and for my background scene I'm going to choose scene BG. That'll take just a second, and then it shows up as my scene. Now you might notice that I've got a camera in here that I can't really do anything with. That's because part of my original scene BG, there is a camera object, so I can delete that and then come back to my new scene, which needs a better name than scene_bg.001. So let's call that scene_0x, since this isn't actually anything that's going to go in. And within this scene, I think I will first, before I forget, add a camera. And that will allow me to kind of get started here. Shift tilde allows me to look through the camera and kind of get set up roughly where I want to be. And let's frame things in right about there. Okay, so that looks pretty good. So you'll notice in my scene that's the only object actually in my outliner, because everything else is just background. Okay, so now that we've done that, I'm going to bring in a character, and I'll probably just bring in let's say the Muska character. So the first thing I've got to do is decide where I want that character to appear. Right now the 3D cursor is right down here at the world origin, and the character, since I'm going to be linking here, the character will actually appear wherever I place the 3D cursor. So let's just kind of get an overhead view here, and I'm going to have the character shift and right click. I'm going to have the character just kind of appear in the air here. I want the cursor to move up just a little, so under view I'm going to change the Z location of my 3D cursor right about there. And you know what, let's just move things around just a little bit better. There we go. That's a good spot right above the steps, and that looks like a pretty good location. Okay, so now when let's see, I don't like perspective view for this sort of thing. There we go. When I bring my character in, they're going to be hovering right where that 3D cursor is. So I'm going to go to File and click on Link, and then I'm going to go to 3D Classes and Production Spring 2020, and under Linked and Char, there we have the Muska character. So I'm going to browse this blend file as if it were a folder, and I'll go into my collections, and there we have the collection called char_Muska. I'll double click on that, wait for just a minute, and here is Muska. So Muska is represented by an empty. That's this big 3-axis crosshairs thing. And because Muska is a very small character, she's a bug, the empty is huge. So that might be one of the first things I'm going to change. Is I'm going to come down here to this empty control here, and the size is currently 1 meter. I'm going to type 5 centimeters for that, and that it looks a little more proportional. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a proxy for Muska's armature so that I can actually animate her movements. And you know what else I'm going to do? I'm going to go back to my background scene, and I'm going to turn off the visibility of these trees. Let's see, I think they're on the grounds. Yeah, so I'm going to turn those off. They'll still render, but for now I'm going to get them out of the way because they keep visually getting in my way. So back to scene 0x, there's Muska. Okay, that's a little better. So with Muska selected, I'm going to go to my object menu, and I'm going to go to relations, and I'm going to click make proxy. And I have all these options for making a proxy. Biped blend rig is the one that I want, or if you can't see that, if the list is too long, just type rig, and that comes up, and then you can see I've now got these two objects here. So I've got char Muska proxy. The proxy object is our rig, and then I've just got char Muska, and that's the rest of everything basically. So I'm also going to parent the rig to the original linked object so that if I move the whole thing as an object, the rig comes along. So with the rig still selected, I'm going to shift click to select my original Muska linked object again, and control P. Then I'm just going to click on object. You can see that now the outliner is representing these objects hierarchically. So char Muska proxy is underneath, hierarchically below char Muska. So if I want to select char Muska proxy separately, it helps to have the outliner open over here. Okay, so at this point I can actually, if I go into pose mode up here, then I can actually start animating Muska. But that's not what I'm going to do yet. I'm going to go back into object mode and just click on the overall parent object, which is really just this empty, and I'm going to animate its position first. That's kind of a good rule of thumb, is to just sort of animate position. So or to animate from big down to small basically. So position is kind of a big sort of macro detail, like where is it, where is the object, not what's it doing with its fingers or is it blinking its eyes. It's just sort of the big ugly details. So right now Muska is flying in the air, so I think Muska probably ought to be tilted forward. So I'm going to first of all I'm going to start, well, let's start on frame 1. We're on frame 92 right now, so rewind. I'm going to rotate this in its local x-axis, which is this axis right here, so that it's tilting forward. To rotate it in its local axis, you can just tap R to rotate and then XX, and 2 X's will rotate it in its local axis. So that's probably a good tilt. Okay, and I'm going to start Muska's position here, so we'll tap I, location and rotation is the keyframe that I want to put in there. So okay, now we want her to fly straight, and I'm going to say it's going to take her 4 seconds to get about over here. I think my goal is going to be to have her come over and land on the back of this chair. So let's give her 4 seconds. So there's 24 frames in a second by default in Blender. So I can do that math in my head, and I can say, okay, that means our next position is going to be on frame 96. But if I've got weirder math than that, like let's say we want it to take 4.7 seconds, then what I can actually do here, Blender's really quite smart. I can come in here to my current frame and I can type 24 times 4.7, and it will take me to frame 113. And so it can actually, I can just type the math in there and it'll do it for me. So 4.7 seconds later is 113 frames. Thank you, Blender. So I'm going to move Muska forward here, and I can constrain my axis to YY if I want, and just have her fly really straight. And then I'm going to tap I and insert a location rotation keyframe. Okay, and one other thing we can see here is that Muska has now gone underground. I don't know why that happened. Oh, I do know why it happened, because I tilted her down. So let's move her up in the z-axis, GZ, and reinsert our keyframe here. I, locrot. Okay, and we've actually animated now, so we can see Muska flies, she comes in and she slows down, and now I'm going to have her take, let's see, we're back on frame 113, so 113 plus, let's go in parentheses, 24 times 2.5. So that'll give us 2.5 more seconds to frame 173. And I'm going to say by this time she will have, let's see if I can see the chair in wireframe mode. There it is. So it's right about here. By this time she'll have maybe sped up a little, so she's going to have turned and come a little more toward the chair. And I'm going to locrot that. Let's see what that looks like. Okay. And that actually looks pretty good. She turns direction. That's a little sudden, so the next thing I'm going to show you, like, it's not really very realistic that she'd slow down, basically easing in and out of each of these keyframes. Let's make sure that's not just a perspective thing, but I don't think it is. So she kind of slows down into this keyframe and really stops, and then kind of comes over this way. So what I'm going to do to fix that is I am going to go into my dope sheet, and I can see these frames here, my object transforms. I've got my X location, Y, Z, and my XYZ rotation as well. And what I want to do in order to keep that easing in and out from happening is I'm just going to select these keyframes and go to my key menu. Then I'm going to go to interpolation mode, and I'm going to change it from, by the default is Bezier, and then I'm going to change it to linear. And it changes the look of them a little bit, but now if you watch her fly, she's not going to slow down between frames. The graph between them is going to be linear. Okay. Now that little bank she does right here is not very realistic, is it? So I think probably I can have her turn a little bit differently, and really the best way to do what I'm trying to do here is to have her follow a curve, but that's a little bit different than what I actually want to achieve in this tutorial. So we are going to have her start turning. That's her Z rotation, so I'm going to just grab this Z rotation keyframe, and I'm going to move it back here and see what that looks like if she doesn't start turning a little better. That is better. Let's move it back even further and see if okay, and that's actually pretty good. Okay, so it's not great, but it's better than it was, and we're going to leave it there for the sake of brevity in the tutorial. The next thing I'm going to do, let's see, we're going to have her come in and kind of ease into a landing here, and this one I'm going to do visually. I can see roughly how long her different sections of flight take, and I kind of want this last section to go slower. So we'll take it all the way out to frame 250 for her to get this last little leg of her journey done. And I can see the back of the chair here, so we're just going to move her here. And then in the z-axis, move her right here. Okay. We'll change her location and rotation right there. Okay, and that should be a little slower. The other thing I'm going to do is I actually kind of want that ease in and ease out behavior back here, so I'm going to select these last frames and go to my key menu again, change my interpolation mode back to Bezier. Whoops, sorry, I've got to select arrange, key, interpolation mode, Bezier. There we go. And so now she'll kind of ease out of this last one. There we go. Okay, I want her landing to be a little more complicated than that. I think at this point she would probably, let's see, she's got a location right here. At this point she would probably have swooped up somewhat and maybe righted herself a little bit. So I'm going to move her in the z-axis, and then I'm going to grab another keyframe, Locroat keyframe there. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete all of the location keyframes except for Z. So Y location goes away, X location goes away, and that means that we're not interpolating between those others. We're just going to animate the Z location there. So she kind of comes up and then sets down. And now I'm going to revise something on this last keyframe. I'm going to tilt her back. GXX. RXX. We'll just tilt her so that she looks like she belongs on the back of that chair. And we'll keyframe that rotation since we didn't actually change her location. So she kind of comes in and she sets down. Okay, and that's pretty good. And I think I'm going to have her give a little bit, when I animate her bones, I'm going to have her give a little bit of a soft landing there. So I'm going to grab all of these and move them back to frame 240. So I just have those last 10 frames to kind of have her weight sort of settle onto the chair. Okay, so I've got roughly her flight path and her landing in place. So now I want her to move a little bit realistically inside of that. So I'm going to make my dope sheet a little smaller here. Don't really need that at the moment. Okay, frame 1, we're flying, and this might be a good time to actually sort of start posing her a little bit. So I'm going to select her armature, which, as you can see, I don't know exactly why, but for some reason it's hard to select in the viewport. So again, that's why I leave my my outliner opens with the hierarchy visible for Charamusca and Charamusca proxy, so I can just select Charamusca proxy over here and then go into pose mode. Okay, so from here we can actually kind of start posing this character. I think that to be aerodynamic, these characters would probably fly with their feet kind of down to their side, or their arms kind of down to the side, and with their head up so that they know roughly where they're going. I like to think that their knees would be just a little bit bent, their toes a little bit pointed. So I'm just moving and then rotating. I don't think their toes would be like next to each other. You generally want to avoid perfectly symmetrical poses. Okay, so that's a good flying pose. And now I have the pleasure of remembering all of the bones that I just moved. So I'm going to keyframe them. So I know I moved, I both located and rotated both feet, both wrist controllers, So let's put locrote keyframes on those. I did a rotation on the neck. I did a rotation on this abdomen bone. And I think that might be it. Okay, so I kind of want Muska to be moving and just sort of reacting as though there's wind, or maybe she's balancing while she's flying, and that you might think, okay, that's going to take a lot of keyframes, but it really doesn't. So let's do this with the feet first. So I'm going to select both feet here. I already have a locrote keyframe at frame 1 for them. I know that she's going to land at frame 240, so I'm going to go to about frame 235. And I know that she ends up over here, just about to land. Oh man, I need to turn off more objects. This is obnoxious. Okay, she's just about to land, so I'm going to keyframe her feet right there. And those are actually the only two keyframes I really need to do there. So the reason that is now that I've got those two keyframes, if I change this dope sheet briefly into a graph editor, I can select, let's say, the Z location for each of these feet. Let's see if I can tell which color that is. Okay, Z location is this kind of purpley guy. Second one down. Let's zoom all the way over here and select the other keyframe for that. And then if I tap in or click this little arrow to open up this side panel, I can put a modifier on this graph. And I'm just going to do a noise modifier. You can see that that kind of shakes the line there. And this is probably way too much shaking. But now if we watch Muska flying, you'll see that left foot, which is the one that we just put the modifier on, that left foot is kind of pumping up and down like crazy. A little too much. It's looking really twitchy. So, and I can see that it's going up and down so fast that it's really like, here's frame 208, here's frame 209, and it's already gone down and up once. So that's way too fast. So I'm going to scale this effect. Let's see, I'll pull this out so you can see what these values mean. I'm going to scale this much larger so that she's just kind of slowly reacting to the winds. And let's see kind of what that looks like. Okay, and that's actually quite a bit of movement. So I'm going to take the strength down to about maybe a third of that, 0.33 maybe. Okay, and that looks a little bit better. So now we're going to do the same thing to the Z location on the other foot. If I can find those keyframes. Okay, and here is, whoop, nope. Okay, it's the one right above the other one. So we'll add the same modifier with roughly the same values, noise, and I can't remember how we scaled that out, but I can see it. So there's kind of a similar sort of arc. And you know what? That looks maybe even, well, no, I think that looks about right. Up and down about twice a second. That might even be too fast still. Let's let's double it. Let's go to 30 on that, and let's go to 30-ish on, well, let's change it to a different number, 27 on the other. There we go. Okay, so now those feet will just kind of drift up and down in a fairly random way because of that noise generator that we put on them. And that's a really handy way to kind of add a fairly organic feel quickly without having to keyframe every movement through this 250 frames. Okay, so we can do the same thing to the hands if we want. I won't bore you with watching me do that, but last thing, last thing for the character for this tutorial, let's land the character. So I'm going to change this graph sheet back to a dope sheet because I think we're going to need it. And we're here at frame 240 where the character is supposed to be about landed, and you can see that her feet are not on the ground, but her master controller is. Now, you don't want to animate the master controller in pose mode. That's a bad idea. Okay. Generally speaking, there's not going to be any call for that. There are a few situations where that's okay. This is not one of them. So she comes down, she's going to land, and I want her to be stable at that point and kind of react. Oh, and I forgot to do something. Her feet are still pumping here, see? So we've got to stop that. Let's go back to the graph editor really quickly and select that bone so we can see. Okay, and what we're going to do here is we're going to restrict the frame range. So by the time we hit frame 240, we want this over 240. So we're going to start this. Frame 0 is fine. Frame 240 is where we want it to end. So let's restrict the other one really quickly. Restrict frame range and 240. So those will stop moving up and down after frame 240, which is when we're going to do our little landing action. Okay. So now we're still at frame 241, and by this time, let's see, 235 is our last keyframe for those. So 240, I'm going to want these feet planted. So I'm just going to clear out any movement and rotation I've done to those with Alt-R and to clear the rotation, and Alt-G to clear the movement. And you can see that that's pretty close to planted because the master controller here is pretty close to planted. So I'll keyframe that and do the same thing on this side. Alt-R, Alt-G, Low-Grote. Okay, so now you can see she comes in, she puts her feet down, and I am going to, at this point, when her feet touch, I'm going to put a keyframe on her master torso controller, location and rotation, and then 5 frames down, just a little bend of the knees, I Low-Grote, and then Option G, Option R, and Low-Grote. Okay, so she comes in now for a landing, plants her feet, and then she reacts just a little, and I'm feeling like that reaction is just a little behind where it should be. So I'm going to change this graph editor back to a dope sheet, or actually I can just do this in the timeline, and I'm going to take the master controller, these three keyframes, and I'm going to move them back about 3 frames and see how that looks. So she comes in, plants her feet, and that feels a little more natural. I'm going to move it even 1 more frame back. Comes in, plants her feet, yeah, that's a good reaction. Okay, and she also ought to be probably moving her head back down because it's not natural for her to still be looking up. So right now she's still tilted. She's looking forward. So I'm going to say this is the last point at which her head ought to be tilted this much. So I'm going to keyframe its rotation right there again. And then as she comes in, I'm going to rotate that down. Rotate in XX. In fact, I'm even going to have her look down a little so she's kind of looking where she's going to land. We'll keyframe her rotation right there. And then after her feet plant, we'll keyframe there because we want her still to be looking down. So two identical keyframes, and then she'll start to look up to finish at frame 250. Just like that. Okay, and it would be natural for her hands to bounce just a little as she comes in, so I'm going to, just to be fast, I'll do them together, and let's keyframe their location and rotation right here, and we'll have them bounce just a little behind her knees, bending time-wise. We'll rotate them both up just a little. Whoop. Rotate in ZZ, which is the local Z-axis. And I don't like putting those hands identical, so I'm going to have them be rotated just a little differently. Okay, so she comes in, she lands, and that kind of gives a bit more weight to her landing. Okay, so very last thing, our camera. We don't have a very great view of this whole thing, so what I'm going to do is start on frame 1 with my camera. I'm going to fly it video game style, so Shift tilde gives me WASD controls. So W moves me forward toward Muska, D moves me left, and D moves me right, A moves me left, S moves me back, E up, and Q down. So once I'm in a position I'm satisfied with, I click, or maybe I want to get in even closer there. Okay, so since I have the camera, let's select the camera and keyframe its location and rotation. Now I just got that warning, not suitable for active keying set. That's because, whoops, I'm still in pose mode. So let's go to object mode, select our camera in earnest, and now we'll keyframe the location and rotation. And this might be a little easier if I split my window out, give myself a bird's eye view as well as a camera view. So here's my camera. Okay, and let's keyframe that and see how well that follows. Okay, so Muska's flying, and she flies to this point, at which point we're going to kind of bring the camera back to catch up with her. Grote, and we'll go over to frame 173. There she is. We'll start to kind of rotate back. Grote, Then we'll come in for a landing here about frame 237. Okay, and this, whoa, so our turn here was a little too sudden. So about halfway through, let's just keyframe our rotation right there. And that's not great camera work, but it'll work for kind of what we're doing. Matter of fact, let's, whoop, there we go. Let's put another rotation keyframe right there to sort of keep Muska in the frame. Okay, and I'm pretty happy with that. So then I would just save my work, and if I'm done with that scene, then that's scene 0x. I would start a new scene by copying my settings again and establishing my background, and that's how you animate within our short film. I hope that's helpful, and I hope everybody has a great day. Goodbye.